"Meet the family embarrassment we have to tolerate," Diana Crawford announced loudly to the cluster of elegantly dressed guests, her voice carrying across the manicured lawn of the exclusive Brookside Country Club in Charleston, South Carolina. I felt every eye turn toward me as I stood quietly beside the rose garden, clutching my simple beige purse. The laughter that followed felt like tiny needles pricking my skin, but I kept my composure, just as I always had. My name is Margaret Thompson, and at 67 years old, I should have been accustomed to Diana's cruel remarks by now. But on my daughter Rebecca's wedding day, surrounded by Charleston's elite society members, the sting felt particularly sharp. I had chosen a modest navy dress from a department store, nothing like the designer gowns that rustled around me, but it was clean, pressed, and appropriate. That apparently wasn't enough for my new daughter-in-law's mother. "I cannot believe Rebecca chose to marry into such ordinary circumstances," Diana continued, her voice dripping with disdain as she gestured toward me with her champagne flute. The other women in her circle nodded knowingly, their pearl necklaces catching the afternoon sunlight. We tried to suggest a smaller ceremony, something more appropriate for their financial situation. I watched my beautiful daughter across the terrace, radiant in her grandmother's altered wedding gown, dancing with her new husband, James. He was a kind young man, nothing like his pretentious mother, and I could see the genuine love in his eyes when he looked at Rebecca. That was what mattered, I reminded myself, not the whispered comments and sideways glances from people who measured worth by stock portfolios and country club memberships. Diana Crawford had made it clear from the moment James brought Rebecca home that she considered our family beneath theirs. The Crawfords owned Crawford Investment Partners, one of the most prestigious financial firms in the Southeast, and their wealth afforded them a lifestyle I could never provide for Rebecca. Diana never missed an opportunity to remind me of this fact, whether through backhanded comments about Rebecca's humble upbringing or pointed questions about my own financial situation. "She's probably wondering how she'll afford the reception dinner," one of Diana's friends whispered loud enough for me to hear, causing another round of muffled laughter. I took a slow sip of my punch and smiled politely, just as I had taught Rebecca to do when facing difficult people. Little did they know that their cruel entertainment was about to take an unexpected turn, though I certainly hadn't planned it that way. I had raised Rebecca alone after her father passed away when she was just 8 years old. Those early years were difficult, working double shifts as a nurse at Charleston General Hospital to keep our small apartment and put food on the table. Rebecca never complained about the secondhand clothes or the nights I worked late, never asked for the expensive toys her classmates had. She was grateful, hardworking, and kind. Everything that mattered far more than the size of a bank account. But I had been careful with money in ways that Diana Crawford could never understand. While she spent thousands on designer handbags and European vacations, I saved every penny I could. I invested wisely, lived modestly, and built something substantial over the decades. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very people mocking my simple lifestyle had no idea of the financial foundation beneath it. Diana had insisted on hosting the wedding reception at her country club, claiming it was her gift to the young couple. In reality, I knew it was another opportunity for her to showcase her superior social standing while making me feel like an unwelcome charity case. She had even suggested I might be more comfortable skipping the reception altogether, though Rebecca had firmly refused that suggestion. "Mother Thompson, you look lovely," Rebecca had whispered to me during the ceremony, squeezing my hand. She had started calling me that after the engagement, wanting to honor both her new family and her roots. It was one of many small gestures that reminded me why I had worked so hard to give her the foundation for a good life. James had tried to warn me about his mother's sharp tongue. "She means well," he had said during our first awkward family dinner 6 months ago. "She's just protective of our family's reputation." I had smiled and nodded, understanding that he was caught between loyalty to his mother and love for my daughter. It wasn't his fault that Diana viewed kindness as weakness and humility as shame. The wedding had been beautiful despite Diana's constant criticisms during the planning process. She had questioned every choice, from the flowers to the music to the guest list, always with the underlying message that our preferences were somehow inadequate. When Rebecca chose to wear my mother's pearl earrings instead of the diamond set Diana had offered, Diana had sighed dramatically and muttered something about sentimental over sensible. Now, as I watched the woman who would soon be sharing holidays and family gatherings with us, I wondered if she would ever see past her own prejudices. The guests around her were hanging on every cutting remark, clearly entertained by her performance at my expense. But I had learned long ago that dignity came from within, not from the approval of people who measured worth by material possessions. The humiliation reached its peak when Diana decided to make her cruelty even more public. She tapped her champagne glass with her wedding ring, calling for attention from the entire reception. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of wealthy investors, "I'd like to take a moment to welcome our new family member." Every conversation stopped. Rebecca and James paused mid-dance, looking toward Diana with expressions that mixed hope and concern. I felt my chest tighten, knowing that any speech from Diana was unlikely to be kind, but I straightened my shoulders and prepared for whatever was coming. "Margaret Thompson has joined our family today," Diana continued, gesturing toward me with theatrical flourish. "And while we come from very different circumstances, we believe in embracing all levels of society." The pause before circumstances was deliberate, calculated to draw maximum attention to our perceived difference in social class. A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the crowd. Some guests looked genuinely embarrassed by Diana's obvious cruelty, but others seemed entertained by the drama. I could see Rebecca's face reddening with anger and embarrassment, her joy in the day being poisoned by her new mother-in-law's public performance. "Of course, we understand that not everyone can afford the finer things in life," Diana went on, warming to her theme. "Margaret works as a nurse, such noble, humble work, and we admire her dedication to serving others despite her limited means. It takes real character to maintain dignity when you're struggling financially." The words hit like physical blows. She was painting me as a charity case in front of Charleston's most prominent families, making my daughter's wedding day about my supposed inadequacy rather than Rebecca's happiness. I watched James put his arm around Rebecca, whispering something in her ear that I hoped was reassurance rather than apology. "We've tried to help where we can," Diana continued, her voice taking on a tone of practiced benevolence. "After all, family takes care of family, even when the circumstances are challenging. We believe in lifting up those less fortunate." That was when I noticed Kenneth Crawford, Diana's younger brother and partner in their investment firm, standing near the terrace entrance. His face had gone completely white, and he was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. His champagne glass trembled slightly in his hand, and I could see him mouthing something to himself, as if trying to place a memory. Diana was building to her crescendo, completely oblivious to her brother's reaction. "So let's raise our glasses to Margaret Thompson," she declared with false warmth. "May she find comfort in knowing that her daughter has married into a family that values generosity toward those in need." The moment hung in the air like a storm about to break, and I realized that Kenneth's recognition was about to change everything in ways none of us had anticipated. Kenneth Crawford's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the brick terrace with a crash that seemed to echo across the suddenly quiet reception. Every head turned toward him as he stood frozen, his face a mask of dawning horror and recognition. Diana stopped mid-sentence, her practiced smile faltering as she followed the direction of everyone's stares. "Kenneth? What on earth?" Diana began, but her brother held up a shaking hand to silence her. "Wait," Kenneth said, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying across the entire reception area. "Wait just a minute." He took several unsteady steps toward me, his eyes never leaving my face. "Aren't you... oh my God, aren't you the anonymous investor who owns our entire business?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the evening breeze seemed to pause, as if nature itself was holding its breath for what would come next. Diana's mouth fell open in confusion, her champagne glass hovering halfway to her lips as she processed her brother's words. "I don't understand what you're talking about," Diana said quickly, her voice higher than usual. "Kenneth, you're obviously mistaken. This is Margaret Thompson, Rebecca's mother. She's a nurse at Charleston General." But Kenneth wasn't listening to his sister. He was walking toward me now, his steps gaining confidence as recognition solidified into certainty. "The quarterly meetings," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "The signed documents. Margaret Thompson of Thompson Holdings." He stopped directly in front of me, searching my face for confirmation. "You're MT, aren't you? Our silent partner." I had dreaded this moment for 3 years, ever since Rebecca had first brought James home for dinner. When she had mentioned his last name, I had felt a chill of recognition, but I had hoped the connection would never surface. Crawford Investment Partners had been struggling badly when they approached my investment firm, desperate for capital injection to avoid bankruptcy. They had never met me in person. All negotiations had been handled through intermediaries and legal representatives. "I think there's been some confusion," I said quietly, though I could see from Kenneth's expression that denial was useless. The pieces were falling into place for him, and there would be no stopping the revelation now. $25 million, Kenneth said, loud enough for the entire reception to hear. "You provided $25 million in capital when we were facing complete financial collapse. We've been sending quarterly reports to Thompson Holdings for 3 years, never knowing." He trailed off, looking back at his sister with an expression that mixed shock with dawning dread. Diana's face had gone from confusion to pale understanding. "That's impossible," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Kenneth, you're making a terrible mistake. She can't possibly be." "The investment agreement specifically states that MT maintains controlling interest," Kenneth continued, his voice growing stronger as the full implications hit him. 48% ownership of Crawford Investment Partners, with veto power over major business decisions. He looked around at the assembled guests, many of whom were Crawford Investment Partners clients. "She's not just an investor. She's our primary stakeholder." The whispers started then, a ripple of shocked conversation spreading through the crowd like wildfire. I could see the country club members who had been laughing at Diana's cruel jokes now reassessing everything they had just witnessed. The woman they had been mocking as a struggling nurse was apparently the financial power behind one of Charleston's most prestigious investment firms. Diana's carefully constructed performance was crumbling in real time. Her face cycled through emotions: disbelief, humiliation, and finally, desperate anger. "This has to be some kind of mistake," she said, her voice rising to near hysteria. "Kenneth, tell them this is impossible." "Actually, it's completely accurate," I said, finally finding my voice. The time for hiding was over, whether I had planned it or not. I opened my simple beige purse and withdrew a leather portfolio that I always carried, containing the legal documents that proved my investment holdings. Thompson Holdings has been the primary financial backer of Crawford Investment Partners since March 2022. Kenneth's face was ashen as he nodded confirmation. "We were 3 weeks away from bankruptcy," he admitted to the stunned crowd. "Our client base had shrunk by 60%. We had regulatory fines pending, and our creditors were threatening foreclosure. Ms. Thompson's investment saved our firm, our employees' jobs, and our family's entire livelihood." I could see Diana's world shifting beneath her feet as the full scope of her mistake became clear. She had spent the last hour publicly humiliating the woman who literally owned nearly half of her family's business. The guests around us were beginning to murmur among themselves, and I could see several prominent Charleston families exchanging meaningful glances. "The quarterly reports we've been sending show steady growth since the capital injection," Kenneth continued, his voice growing more strained with each revelation. "Our client assets under management have increased from 42 million to over 200 million. We've been able to expand our services, hire additional advisors, and maintain our reputation in the community." He paused, swallowing hard. "All because of Ms. Thompson's investment and ongoing support." Diana made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Well, if that's true," she said, her voice shaking, "then why didn't she ever tell us? Why keep it secret? It seems rather deceptive." "Because," I said calmly, "the investment agreement specifically includes a confidentiality clause protecting my anonymity. Your firm requested complete discretion regarding the source of the capital injection. I respected that request, just as I respected your family's need to maintain your professional reputation without outside interference." The implication hung heavy in the air. Diana and Kenneth had actively sought to hide their financial crisis and their dependence on outside investment. They had wanted to maintain the appearance of family-owned success while secretly relying on my capital to stay afloat. Kenneth looked like he might be sick. "Diana, do you understand what you've done?" he whispered, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. She could withdraw her investment at any time. The agreement includes termination clauses that allow her to liquidate her position with 90 days' notice. 90 days, Diana repeated numbly, the full weight of her public humiliation finally sinking in. Around us, the country club elite who had been laughing at her cruel jokes were now watching her complete social destruction with fascination. The woman who had positioned herself as Charleston's arbiter of social worth had just revealed herself to be entirely dependent on someone she had publicly ridiculed. "Ms. Thompson," Kenneth said, turning to address me with a respect that was painfully absent from his sister's earlier performance. "I want to apologize on behalf of my family for any discomfort you've experienced today. I had no idea you were Rebecca's mother. And if you had known, you would have treated me differently," I interrupted gently. "But the person you're apologizing to is the same person your sister spent the last hour mocking. The only thing that's changed is your understanding of my financial situation." The truth of that statement settled over the reception like a blanket, and I could see it registering on faces throughout the crowd. Diana's hands were shaking so badly that she had to set down her champagne glass on a nearby table. The woman who had commanded the room with her cruel performance just minutes earlier now looked small and desperate. "Margaret," she said, her voice barely recognizable from the confident tone she had used to humiliate me. "I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding here." "No misunderstanding," I replied, keeping my voice calm and measured. "You made your feelings about me quite clear. You believe I'm an embarrassment to your family, someone whose humble circumstances require your charitable tolerance." I looked around at the assembled guests, many of whom were now avoiding eye contact with Diana. "You wanted to make sure everyone here understood exactly how you view me." Kenneth stepped forward, clearly trying to salvage what remained of his family's professional reputation. "Ms. Thompson, please understand that Diana had no idea about your business relationship with our firm. If you had known, you would have treated me with the respect that money commands," I said, cutting him off. "But respect shouldn't be conditional on wealth, should it?" I let that question hang in the air for a moment. "Your sister didn't mock me because she thought I was poor. She mocked me because she thought she could get away with it." Diana finally found her voice again, though it came out as a desperate whisper. "I was just trying to welcome you to the family. Sometimes my words come out wrong when I'm nervous." "You called me a family embarrassment," I said clearly, ensuring everyone present could hear. "You suggested I was struggling financially and needed your charitable assistance. You made my daughter's wedding day about your supposed superiority over someone you considered beneath you." I paused, letting the words sink in. "None of that was nervous chatter, Diana. That was calculated cruelty." The guests were now openly staring at Diana, their earlier amusement replaced by uncomfortable recognition. Several country club members were whispering among themselves, and I could see at least 3 couples preparing to leave early. Diana's social performance had backfired spectacularly, revealing her character in the harshest possible light. "What can we do to make this right?" Kenneth asked desperately. "Surely we can work through this misunderstanding." "This isn't a business negotiation, Kenneth," I said firmly. "This is about how your family chooses to treat people they believe have less power than they do. You can't negotiate your way out of character flaws." Diana made one final frantic attempt to regain control. "You have to understand, Margaret. I've been under so much stress planning this wedding. I wanted everything to be perfect for James and Rebecca. Sometimes when I'm anxious, I say things I don't mean. The wedding planning stress made you call me an embarrassment in front of 100 people?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "It made you suggest that my financial struggles were something to pity?" I shook my head. "Diana, the stress revealed who you really are. It didn't create a different person." Kenneth was looking around frantically, clearly recognizing that his sister had destroyed not only her own reputation, but potentially damaged their business relationships as well. Several of their clients were in attendance, and word of this disaster would spread through Charleston's tight-knit financial community within hours. "Please," Diana whispered, her carefully applied makeup now streaked with tears. "You have to understand that I never meant for this to happen. I would never intentionally insult someone important." She stopped, realizing what she had just said. The silence that followed was deafening. "Someone important," I repeated, letting Diana's words echo across the terrace. "That's the heart of it, isn't it? You're not sorry for being cruel. You're sorry that you were cruel to someone with power over your family's future." Diana opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. Around us, the guests were witnessing the complete collapse of her social facade. The woman who had positioned herself as Charleston society's moral authority had just admitted that her apologies were based solely on my financial influence, not on any recognition that her behavior had been wrong. Kenneth was desperately trying to calculate the damage. "Ms. Thompson, I want you to know that Diana's views don't represent our firm's values or our family's true feelings. We have the utmost respect for you and your investment partnership." "Do you?" I asked quietly. "Because your sister just spent an hour demonstrating exactly how your family treats people they believe are powerless. The only difference now is that you've discovered I'm not powerless." I looked directly at Diana, who was still standing frozen in shock. "The question is, what would you have done if Kenneth hadn't recognized me? How would you have treated Rebecca's mother for the rest of our lives together?" The truth was written clearly on Diana's tear-streaked face. She would have continued the cruelty, escalated it even. Secure in her belief that I had no recourse against her social and financial superiority. The wedding reception would have been just the beginning of years of calculated humiliation. "I think we need to discuss this privately," Kenneth said, his voice tight with panic. "Perhaps we could arrange a meeting to—" "No," I said firmly. "You made this public. Diana chose to humiliate me in front of everyone here. She can face the consequences of that choice in the same setting." I looked around at the assembled guests, many of whom were now openly recording the confrontation on their phones. "Let's make sure everyone understands exactly what happened here today." I pulled the leather portfolio from my purse and opened it deliberately, extracting the investment agreements that had saved Crawford Investment Partners from bankruptcy. These documents represent a $25 million investment that has enabled your family to maintain your lifestyle, your business, and your social standing, I said, holding the papers where everyone could see them. Without this capital injection, Crawford Investment Partners would have closed its doors 3 years ago. Diana's face crumpled as the full scope of her humiliation became clear. Not only had she publicly attacked her family's most crucial business partner, but she had done so while celebrating that partner's daughter's wedding. The irony was devastating. She had mocked my supposed financial inadequacy while being completely dependent on my wealth for her own family's survival. The investment agreement includes several interesting clauses, I continued, flipping through the pages, including my right to terminate the partnership with 90 days written notice and my veto power over major business decisions. I looked directly at Diana, It also includes provisions for protecting the investor's reputation and ensuring professional treatment in all business relationships. Kenneth's face went white as he understood the implications. Ms. Thompson, surely we can reach an understanding. You've already shown me your understanding, I interrupted. Diana made it perfectly clear how your family views people they believe are beneath them. The only thing that's changed is your knowledge of where the power actually lies. I carefully returned the documents to my portfolio. I'll be in touch with my lawyers next week to discuss the future of our business relationship. Diana finally found her voice, though it came out as a broken whisper. Please, don't let this destroy everything we've worked for. Think about James and Rebecca. I am thinking about them, I said coldly. I'm thinking about the family they're marrying into. Diana Crawford's reputation in Charleston's exclusive social circles was irreparably destroyed within days of the wedding disaster. Country club members who had witnessed her cruel performance spread the story throughout their networks, making her a cautionary tale about the dangers of judging others by appearances rather than character. Her membership in several prestigious organizations was quietly terminated when society leaders learned she had publicly humiliated the anonymous investor whose $25 million had saved her family's failing business. Client confidence in Crawford Investment Partners plummeted as word spread through the financial community about Diana's appalling judgment and treatment of their firm's primary stakeholder, resulting in significant account withdrawals and forcing Kenneth to offer her a purely ceremonial role with no client contact. The investment firm faced months of uncertainty as I explored options to withdraw my capital and partner with more appreciative firms, ultimately agreeing to maintain the investment only after Diana was completely removed from any business operations, and Kenneth implemented comprehensive sensitivity training for all family members involved in the company. As I watched Rebecca and James drive away from their reception, their happiness unmarred despite the day's drama, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that went beyond simple revenge. The young couple would build their marriage on a foundation of genuine love and respect, free from the toxic influence Diana had planned to wield over their lives, and they would always know that true worth comes from character rather than bank balances. Sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simply allowing people to discover how profoundly they have misjudged those they choose to mock, proving that dignity and strength often hide behind the most unassuming facades, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves and restore the balance that prejudice had tried to destroy.